Welcome to the Jamodi Podcast, where we interview coaches and leaders to find out not just what they do, but how they do what they do. Becoming the best version of ourselves is Jamodi, just a matter of doing it.
Today we are joined by shooting coach Dave Love. Coach Love has been an NBA shooting coach for the Phoenix Suns, the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the Orlando Magic. Over the years, he's helped dozens of NBA players and hundreds of college players improve their shot. Coach Love runs youth shooting and coaching clinics all around the world for high schools and select programs. Before we hear from Coach Love, take a moment to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on social media at Jamodi Podcast.
So my first question, and I think it might be hard for you just because of the amount of shooting games that you have or know or use, but what's your favorite shooting game?
To be honest, I don't necessarily do a lot of games.
Okay.
But
Drill or game, sometimes it's something that has maybe more of a time, some type of pressure. You have to make a certain amount in a row, any of those components. I know you spend a majority of your time teaching, but anything there?
All of the drills that I do end up being for a very specific reason. Like they're also tailored around a habit, and especially early on in a player's development, I try and avoid attaching a time or a goal to it. The goal is to rework the habit. And so sometimes we can, early on in re-coordinating a movement pattern, we can sabotage our ultimate goal, which is learning a new habit, by attaching a secondary goal to it that isn't really the priority.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying at all that there's anything wrong with doing that. It's a good idea, but it's just not the world that I tend to live in. I'm focused, when a player's working with me, we're focused on re-coordinating the movement pattern. And so I'm hyper aware of not sabotaging that goal with a secondary goal.
That's great. No, I completely makes sense, and I see that. So starting off with a shooter, what are some of the main habits that you like to address? Since I said I can't tell you a kid and what put a kid in front of you and hear the things he has wrong. What are some of the main points?
I think the two biggest ones are, if you give, okay, your limit's 2, I can give you 2. And then if you increase it to 3, I can give you 3. And if you increase it to 4, I got the fourth one. So if you only give me 2, I'm going to say I want to focus on the connections. I want to focus on how we connect the basketball, how our hands hold and touch and then provide energy to the basketball. And then how do we connect to the floor? How are our feet positioned so that we can control the energy that we create by moving, and then hopefully create better energy as we start into the shooting motion. And then if you'll give me a third, then I want to focus on
as many as you want. Yeah.
Of the basketball. Does the basketball get going in a seamless path, a gentle arc beginning up and then moving forward, rather than changing directions a whole bunch of times? So those would be the first areas that I'd focus on. And when I'm first meeting a player, checking to see, do they do those things well?
So let's just, if you don't mind, just breaking those down a little bit. The feel of the ball in their hand. What are some things that you're looking for there?
I want to make sure that the middle of the player's hand is underneath the center of the basketball. By the set point. Ideally, we get the center of the hand underneath the center of the ball at that position, kind of right around the forehead. If we're later than that, then we're running the risk of pushing the ball offline. And so if we can get the middle of the hand underneath the middle of the basketball, we're applying force evenly to both sides of the ball, and the ball has a chance to go straight. If you're over on one side of the basketball, you run the risk of pushing the ball offline in the opposite direction, or having to compensate for that being out of position by making another negative move, another move that's away from the hoop, and hoping those two negatives add up to a positive. And they can. It's just harder to do that consistently.
Harder to replicate, right? Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So if that ball is off to the side, obviously they're probably using their offhand or guide hand in a way that is manipulating and pushing the ball.
Right, or leaning their body, or or snapping their wrist offline. There will be, if there's negative energy being provided at the start of the motion, there'll have to be negative energy in the opposite direction towards the end of the motion to cancel it out. Otherwise, they're going to miss significantly offline in the first direction.
One thing I've just noticed with players is when they have the ball in their hands and it's moving up it towards that forehead, their wrist, whether it's bent, and you growing up, you have coaches that, I want to see wrinkles in your wrist.
Yep.
All of those one-liners that sound great, but what about those players that it does seem to be straight? I've noticed sometimes they end up bending at the end, but that's motion going backwards
Right.
instead of forwards. Where do you talk about them and their wrist and how they get that set?
Well, these are great questions, and we just have to understand that there's those all fall into your theory that we all should have as coaches. We should have our theory. That's sort of like our skeleton. And then we need to know when to go a little off script with the theory, because each player is not a theoretical player. They're a real person with specific habits. And so there aren't really black and white rules on anything. There's guidelines. And a great guideline would be get your wrist bent back as early as you possibly can. A reality is that wrist might be bending as we're lifting, and as long as it's in place by that set point, I'm fine with it. But to your point, what I don't want is it to be set up all in that last moment. If we're just getting to the set point and then there's a violent movement, then we're running the risk of losing control over the basketball. We'd like that to be a smooth transition from maybe our wrist is flat into that bent position as we're lifting, not a instantaneous transition.
I love that idea of guidelines rather than hard, fast rules, because if every coach out there has hard, fast rules, well, then players moving around are going to be taught that there's only one way, 18 different ways,
Right.
and so that's really good. Yeah.
And you're not necessarily trying to get everybody to look perfect according to your theory. You're trying to get them into a position to be able to make more shots. And some of that is a comfort level. And you want to give a player as many things as they can to be comfortable with, but then change the biggest things that are holding them back. And so again, like it's this gray area of, I can't just let a weak shooter be comfortable. Whatever they're doing as a weak shooter is comfortable, and it's the reason they're weak. We need to change some of those habits. But at the same time, I don't need them to be a robot. We've got to find out what the biggest thing that's holding them back is, and then ultimately change or improve those.
With their feet, shoulder width apart, a little bit wider than shoulder width, 10 toes facing the rim at a turn,
Sure.
all those rabbit holes.
We'll start with the width of them. I loathe the fact that we decided shoulders would be the reference point, because do this with me right now. Try and look at both of your shoulders at the same time.
Can't do it.
We can't even see our own reference. We can't see this reference point.
That's a great point.
And so I talk about hip width apart. And if we look, our hips and our shoulders are probably about the same width. But when you look down at your feet, you can see your hips. And so that's the reference point that I tend to give, just because it's easier for players to see and apply. And then where we measure from, is it the insides of the feet? Is it the outsides of the feet? I always err on the side of, I want to be more stable. The chances are we're not going to quite get what we asked for. And so I always try and ask for a little bit more, knowing we'll probably fall short. And so even though I would love this, I would like the insides of a player's feet to be hip width apart. So in other words, they could sit down in between their feet, and the outsides of their hips would touch the insides of their shoes. That's a perfect world, in my opinion. but we don't always get that. So I err on a side of probably a little bit wider than most people teach, knowing that I'm not going to necessarily
That makes
get
sense.
100%.
And then what about is the turn, whether that it is 10 toes to the rim or slightly pointed, is that more just physical? Like you talked about, I like you said earlier, I wanted to feel comfortable. Like we want their shots to feel good,
Right.
not for them not to struggle through the motion and feel like something physically that's off with it.
Right. And ultimately what we have to pay attention to is where's the energy going? Like we move our body to create energy that we give to the basketball to get it going along our target line. And so hopefully as many parts as our body as possible are creating energy along the target line. So I in a perfect world
Mhm.
would teach 10 toes to the target. And if we look at Steph Curry, Steve Nash, Mark Price, Steve Kerr, Klay Thompson, Kyrie Irving, like all these players that we may even associate with, like when they shoot, they turn their feet. If you look at them at the free throw line, their toes are pointed at the
Oh,
target.
yeah.
But we have to understand it's about the energy. So the reason I teach 10 toes at the target is if you rock up onto your toes with your feet pointed at the target, your center of gravity moves up, which is positive power. That's the direction we want the ball going, and forward, which is also positive power. That's the direction we want the basketball going. Now it's a small amount that it's moving because I'm just rocking up onto my toes. If I turn my feet, my center of gravity is moving up, but it's moving slightly along the
Mhm.
line that my feet are pointed. And if I'm only rocking onto my toes, it's a very small amount of energy. It's not that big of a deal. But if we jump in that direction, that becomes a lot more energy. So I'm not as concerned with uh, where their feet are pointed as much as where is the energy flowing. And if their feet are pointed to the left as a right-handed shooter and they're able to jump straight up and down, I probably won't say anything.
Mhm.
But if they get into a situation where their feet are pointed left and they're jumping to the left as they shoot, which tends to happen from distance, then I want to make sure not that necessarily that their feet get pointed at the target, but that the energy gets created more at the target rather than away from the target. So these are all these
Mhm.
debates that we get into. We lose sight of what really matters. Like,
Yeah.
why do we worry about this? Because of the energy. And even though I have one end of the spectrum that I might lean towards, if you can do it your way and create good energy, great. I'll let you have it.
Mm.
And we need to understand that those guidelines as we talked about earlier, as opposed to like the hard fast rule.
Yeah. That third piece of like the ball tracking moving forward towards the rim, that reverse waterfall type of feel.
Right.
What tell us a little bit about that.
Well, anytime the ball changes direction, you run the risk of there being more variability, like missing, uh, having that direction change either earlier or later, or more significant or less significant, and having a lot more variability in the shot. And then anytime it changes direction, ultimately the power that you created up until that point is lost. And so if a player starts with the ball out away from them
Mhm.
and then reverses the path to get the ball coming back towards their set point, this energy doesn't really transfer as soon as I change the direction. I've got to now start it all over again. And then I have to now get it going up and forward again from my
Yeah.
set point, and I have to change the direction again. So we get all this variability and loss of power. And so I love reverse waterfall. Somebody said one, and this is, I haven't had a chance to work this into a workout, but just another visualization or a cue that I'd never heard of or thought before, like a fishing rod. You imagine the fisherman kind of standing with the rod close, he's pulling the fish in, but the rod is then bent. And I liked that. Immediately they said that, I thought, I can picture
Yeah.
exactly what you're talking about. And
Yeah.
anytime that we can have that moment where we go, oh, then it's a good cue. And
Yeah.
it can be a good cue for one person and a poor, if if the person looks at you and goes, "What's a fisherman?"
What's a fishing? I've never
Never
yeah.
seen a fisherman before, then it's a terrible cue for that person. But for me, it was like a, Oh, I
Uh,
instantaneously know what the heck you're talking about.
if you could, if you're talking with a shooter and maybe at any age, and you trying to build them a daily routine of what does a day of for a great shooter look like? They walk into the gym. What are some things that they start with, move to? What's that look like for you?
I think it's probably going to be different for each person,
Mhm.
but there'll be some general similarities. And so the first thing that I want to do is understand that the first couple of shots, and maybe even like the first couple dozen shots that you shoot, your body probably isn't going to feel right. Like Hussein Bolt doesn't get out of bed, put his feet on the ground, and sprint to the sink to brush his teeth. He probably does the same sort of thing that we all do, where he kind of stretches because their body doesn't feel right. It's just woken
Mhm.
up, and the first time we're in the gym, we're going through that same sort of thing in a shooting slash basketball environment, and so kind of give your body the stretches that we do when unconsciously when we're waking up by putting the body in the correct position as deliberately as we can, or as deliberately as we need to early on in the day. So be deliberate from close in about the habits that you know you need to execute to shoot the ball well. Don't hope that it happens.
Mm.
Force it to happen. Like, I need to get my elbow in. I need to get my guide hand off the basketball. Perfect. That's your thought process. And then, okay, my elbow is in, my guide hand is off the basketball. And right from the beginning of the day, you're reminding your body of the habits that it needs to have. And then being willing to stay close in early, because you're not just warming up your body, you're warming up your confidence as well.
Ah,
And so many players, they go and you see young kids do this all the time. They do a heat check on their first shot and shoot a three to see if they're hot that day, and very rarely are they. But take that idea and say, let's see if I'm hot today. But I'm going to be sneaky, and I'm going to force myself. I'm going to stack the odds in my favor that I'm going to be hot by shooting an easy shot early. Like, make 95% of your first 20 shots and see what that does when
yeah,
you stack dozens of days like that in a row, and you start to go, man, I'm on fire again
that's
today.
right.
Not because you're actually on fire, just because you've chosen to shoot easy shots early on. And then the last thing that I'd say is, you got to know what shots you get
Mm.
and practice those situations. Like, don't just shoot shots from wherever you got the ball when you're grabbing your own rebound. Take an extra second and think, okay, I get a lot of corner threes off a baseline drift. What should I practice? Maybe corner threes on a baseline drift. Hey,
Mhm.
we run a play for me where I get like a little curl off a pin down. What should I practice? Maybe a curl off a pin down. And if you know that you get the same shots often, then practice them in your warm up and incorporate that early on in the day. Like, do practice the things you actually do a lot.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues younger players have going into the gym is their mentality is, I'm just going to get shots up. And when we meet as a team and talk about our weekend and what we're going to do, if a player says that, they almost catch themselves, because in our program, like, we want to work hard, but we want to work smart,
Right.
and we want to have a plan. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. And it's just taking that extra second to have that plan. It doesn't take a lot of energy, and it doesn't take a lot of effort. It's just, okay, in this drill, what's the I always talk about the situation and the habit. And a great drill, you should know both. So it's not just I'm drifting to the baseline and I'm shooting. That's the situation. The habit is, I'm drifting to the baseline. I'm going to try and land with wide feet into my shot, and then I'm going to try and land with wide feet at the end of my shot. Those are the habits that you're working on. And when you know both the situation and the habit, then you're off to the races. And you haven't done that much more, expended that much more energy or that much more thought. You've just asked one more question.
Hmm. Well, one part of this just popped in my head to ask you is about vision. And you hear multiple thing of what to look for, what to focus on, even all the way down to one of the little W's up at the rim.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to see if you're talking with a shooter, uh, what is their actual target? What do they focus on?
I always encourage players to find the long target but something physical, and then incorporate the idea of aim small, miss big. So the little coils that you're talking about, the little W where the net attaches to the rim, I encourage players find the one that's farthest away from you, in the
Mm,
middle of the back of the rim, and try and lock in on that. There are two reasons why. Number one, I pick the long target because we know we're going to get tired. And so I don't want to pick the short target and come up short of the short target as I get tired. I want to pick the long target and come up short where I still have some wiggle room to get a make. And then the second part is I want to make sure we have something tangible. And our eyes are constantly judging distance. And if they're not looking at something physical, it's much harder to judge the distance of air.
mm.
And so if you're looking at that middle, like the middle of the cylinder where you have room to miss in all directions, good idea, but your eyes can't judge the distance of nothing. So
Hmm.
try and pick something physical.
The Jamodi podcast is powered by Sideline Interactive. Sideline Interactive is the leading manufacturer for high quality, innovative scoring tables and LED video display boards that help coaches and schools bring more excitement to fans, create huge fundraising opportunities, and make their jobs easier. Visit sidelineinteractive.com to check out their amazing products. I think so. Form is so important in those habits that shooters have to focus on daily. But then a lot of it also has to do with, and you mentioned it a little bit. You touched on it with starting close, hitting a bunch, building that confidence, finding that joy again that you had from when you were a little kid and it went in the first time, finding that joy in shooting. But how big is the mental side to a player becoming a consistent shooter?
A constant balancing act. And it's huge. And there are a number of alligators in the water in all directions. Like there are ways it can go bad in from being too deliberate to not deliberate enough, and thinking about it too much and never thinking about it. Like there's all kinds of potential problems, and so we have to be really kind of smart and aware of what we talk about, and what we work on, um, and how much we hold somebody accountable to something, but how much we let them be themselves at the same time.
You have a player that comes to you for help, and you notice that mechanically it's pretty smooth and there's not a lot of negative energy happening.
Mhm.
But they've made a comment, or even their family parents have made a comment. He's not struggling with confidence. How do you help with building that in them a little bit?
That really just comes down to your preparation. Confidence is basically your belief in yourself given what you've seen from results in the past, and you can't fake that.
Hmm.
Kids want to know all the time, how can I build my confidence? Make more shots is the simple answer. Like,
Spend
you
more
want
time. Yeah.
now, we can fake ways of being more confident, but they're fake.
Hmm.
And we as coaches, we have to understand that I can't give someone else confidence. And if I do, then that is very fleeting, and as easily as it's given, it's also taken away.
Yeah.
And so one of the mistakes that I see with coaches is we end up doing a lot of drills to build confidence. And the example I'll give is, okay, if you have a shooter who's developing, and they're shooting game threes, and you're filling their confidence with, hey, you just made 20 in a row. We also have to understand that's a double-edged sword. If a player's capable of making 23s in a row in practice, but only 36% in games, we think we're giving them confidence in that practice moment, and we may be, but in that game moment, when all of a sudden they can't make 20 in a row, that we might be taking confidence away. That we're establishing this false positive
Mm.
of, hey, look, you can do this every single time. only because the situation isn't very much like a game. So I may do that in a warm up,
Yeah.
but if you're able to make 23s in a row but only shoot 35% in games, your practice isn't hard enough.
Mm.
And there's too big of a gap between the way that you're practicing and the way that you're playing. And that might be what's holding you back from getting that up to 40%. So confidence is an interesting one that we have to really base around truths
Yeah.
and honesty, and sometimes that can be uncomfortable with players.
I think you're right on the money with it. It's really hard for us to actually give them confidence. It's because it's just talk,
Right.
the words that we use, but through their preparation, the time that they spend, they will actually be able to protect their confidence. Like nobody can take your confidence, but you can give it away freely. So you have to know how to protect it. And the way that you do that is you go back to all of rep the reps that you've had and the thinking that you've had there.
Yeah, it's your body of work over a long period of time, not the result in one instant that builds your confidence. It's like, why is Steph Curry still confident when every playoff series, like I Googled Steph Curry playoff slump, and there were articles from 2016, 2017, and 2019 of Steph's in a slump in the playoffs. Only the next series, he wasn't anymore.
Yeah,
It was
yeah.
just 5 bad games that ended, and he probably didn't even blink. Why? Because it was 5 games when he has thousands of games of evidence that I'm just in the middle of a
Yeah.
bad 5-game stretch, and I'll be out of it soon enough. You just wait.
And what that does is it puts the responsibility more on the players. He can look past that. Ray Allen can go 0 for 11 in a playoff game, and the 2 nights later break the single game record from three. Not because he found a guru or he got zened or something in that time, but he was able to because of all that time. So it's on the players to make sure that they're practicing purposefully and building great habits, but then having the time and reps in to grow and gain that confidence in themselves.
It really all comes down to consistency.
Mm.
And are you? I get asked by players all the time, like, how do I become more consistent? And it's like, are you consistent with the way that you practice?
Oh,
Okay, well, and I think a lot of young players they're searching for the perfect shot. And if I can just learn what this perfect shot is, I'm going to be able to make every shot from now on, or from that moment on. And so they go in one day with an idea of what's going to create the perfect shot, and they're less than perfect because they're a human being.
hmm
And then they go, okay, I guess that wasn't it. Tomorrow I'll have another idea. And they come in the next day with another idea on what the perfect shot might be. And now they practice that for a day, and they miss a few shots in that day, and they go, well, apparently that wasn't the perfect shot either. And so how are you ever going to be consistent when every day you're changing your mechanics?
Yep.
And I had a pro player that was along those lines, and he's now shooting a career high this season from 3, because we haven't panicked.
He's just
And
sticking with it.
yeah,
He's,
we're like,
he's
stay on plan. You
yeah.
were like, yeah, and he's having a little bit of a rough stretch right now. And guess what? We've changed nothing. You were shooting 60% from 3 over the previous 2 months. So we know we can do it. You're just having a rough stretch right now. Don't throw everything in the garbage and start over because of 3 bad games. Continue doing what led to 60% from 3, and
Yeah.
then understand that 60% from 3 is probably not going to be sustainable over the course of an entire season yourself, and expect that it might be some regression back to the norm.
hmm But helping them understand that too, especially the younger players. You made the comment of 20 in a row, but now you're shooting this percentage. Well, that's what it takes to shoot this percentage in a game. It takes this, so helping kind of them connect the dots. So it's not, why do I miss shots in games? I'm not missing shots in practice. Well, I don't think perfection is attainable or
Right,
the
right,
ultimate goal.
right, exactly. That we're trying to get repeatable or
Oh, nice.
reasonably repeatable.
Yep.
as opposed to perfect. And again, it's a balancing act between we're trying to get basketball, especially shooting a basketball, is a really interesting dynamic where it is kind of a closed skill, a repeatable skill in a very, very open environment. So it has elements where it's like darts, where it just do the same thing over and over and over again. But then we've got elements that are more like soccer, where the same thing never happens twice.
Wow. Yeah.
And so we're the balancing act between those two ideas.
I've asked my players before I've asked them, what meaning do you assign to your misses? And what I kind of, after a miss, you can sometimes physically see the meaning that they've just given that miss. But I think if I'm seeing anything, then what internally is it happening? Well, I missed a shot, and then this snowball thinks, well, I must not be very good at this. No one's going to like me. I should probably quit and never play again. You know, that's the pattern that it goes on. So what do you, what meaning do you assign to misses with players?
That's a great question. What's the word I'm searching for? This isn't a great word, but it's the idea. There's just neutrality, being neutral.
Okay.
Like, that you missed. Did the world end? Did your parents stop loving you? Did boyfriend, girlfriend, did they stop? No, you missed.
Next one. Next one. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you miss a great shot. You shoot a great shot, do everything that you intended to do, and the ball doesn't go in because the hoop is, you think about it, shooting is ridiculous. It's not quite as ridiculous as golf, but like
that's a good point.
Like when you think about like, hey, here's a ball this size. At the other end of this gigantic field, there's a hole this big. I'll give you 4 swings to get the ball in the hole. You think about it that way, you go, golf's impossible. There's no way we'd ever be able to do it. Basketball is kind of the same thing. There's a ball this big. I want you to throw it into a hoop this big, this 25, while you're running around. And
yes. Yeah. Good. Great point. Great point.
And so we have to understand, like, you're going to shoot perfect shots that aren't going to go in because sometimes the defense will win. And you're also going to shoot some horrible shots that do go in. And as long as we can just get more habits working for us than against us, we're probably going to have a better chance of good things happening as opposed to bad. And that's really all we can control. We don't control perfection.
Yeah. Coaches, the Jamodi podcast is powered by Bology. What's your BSA score? The Bology skill assessment is the only verified skills metric endorsed by the NIA and NJCAA to discover and develop the best talent for your team. This 10-minute, 100-shot test can be taken for free today on the Bology mobile app. Elevate your game. Why do you believe Steph Curry is such an elite shooter? Is it mechanics, mindset, a combination of both?
A combination of both of those, and like his mechanics are good, but they're not great.
Yeah.
I think part of it is just the innate ability to and give any discipline where you have to hit a target with something. And I bet Steph Curry's really good at it. Like, I bet give him 20 minutes to play darts, he'll be a pretty good. The
ability just to hit the target exactly where he wants to or sees. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. His hand-eye coordination is probably off the charts. Like, from what, like, the average fan has no idea how good a bad NBA shooter is. Like, just empty gym, go make shots. They can have horrible form and repeat it over and over and over and over again. But then the game starts, and that horrible form is rushed, and all the
adrenaline
make it horrible get exposed.
Yeah.
And now they can't repeat it over and over and over again. And we just, I lost my train of thought on where I was going with that, but like, we have no idea. That's what a bad shooter looks like. That's how good a bad shooter is. Steph Curry is an outlier of an outlier of an outlier. Like, bad NBA shooters are outliers. They're better than the average great shooter in high school. I'll put a bad NBA shooter up against the 18-year-old kid who's the best shooter at his school. And in a just standstill contest, I'll bet on the NBA player.
Yeah.
And then you think, okay, to be a good shooter, what does that look like? Like those guys are the outliers of the outliers. And
Yeah.
then you go, the greatest shooter of all time. Like he's a genetic freak, I bet. I bet he is off the charts in multiple categories that are sort of tangentially related to shooting.
Mm.
Or like there will be multiple things that we go, here's where the norm is, and here is Steph Curry.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just special.
Okay, so with that in mind, do you ever talk to younger shooters about patterning themselves, their shot, or watching certain guys do things? Because sometimes when I watch Steph, I mean, because of he's able to either off the bounce, off the move, in so many directions, still get his feet down, but mechanically, to me, it appears to be different releases at times, different
Yep.
follow-throughs at times. Sometimes he sticks it, sometimes he pulls it back. So when you're telling a younger shooter, hey, kind of watch this guy and emulate, that might be a hard one because you said he's at up near the top of the things he can do.
Yeah, the person that I would point to more would be somebody like Klay Thompson, where it is much more the same shot every time.
Yeah.
And the habits are much more consistent. I would say Klay Thompson is the incredible classical musician, and Steph is unbelievable jazz. And
I love that comparison. Yeah, that's great.
And I think a young person would look at jazz and go, oh, they're just improvising. But they don't know that jazz is an improvisation within a structure with these guidelines, and with like, it's not just randomly playing notes. It's knowing this sort of pattern and flow. And I would guess, I'm not an educated music person necessarily, although I do love it. I would guess that if you asked a jazz player to play classical music, they'd probably be really, really good at it. You ask a classical player to play jazz, maybe not quite as good. And so we kind of have to learn the elements of classical music before we can start to really improvise off of it. We need to learn to be Klay Thompson before we can be Steph Curry, even though they're probably 1 and 1A as far as like the best shooters. It's just Steph is special.
Yeah. Like sometimes I've had a coach tell me that shooting is a lot like handwriting. There's just different ways to still make the same letters, but they also still have similarities that have to be there, or else you don't understand what the word is.
Yeah, your D can still, it can look different than my D.
Yeah.
But then it can't look like a W, and
if there's a line through it, then there's an issue.
Right. Or 2 dots over top. Then we're into a different letter at that point.
How did Larry Bird shoot it so well with just a different kind of look of how far he took the ball back? And is it, now that after our Steph conversation, is it maybe even, what did he do well with his mechanics to still make him such an efficient shooter?
There are mechanically really good things about the way that he shoots the basketball. The middle of his hand is under the middle of the basketball. He does take it back behind his head, which makes the controlling of the distance a little bit more difficult. But then it's an outlier of an outlier, and all the intangibles that come with that. And then it's like, I would guess we're overlooking the fact that if I kind of if I barely went to school from grade 9 to grade and all I did was play 16 hours of basketball a day, I could probably make, and I had unbelievable talent, I could probably make some unorthodox form work for me, as long as you've got a Venn diagram of reasonable technique with some really good things happening, to freak athlete, to just obsessive about this and practicing more than anybody. And you put those things together, and it will probably work out pretty well. But the kids think that, oh, good, I can just shoot however I want. Well, do you have the incredible, are you an outlier of an outlier of an outlier, or are you just kind of average?
Yeah. That's
Chances are we're all average. And
yeah, the odds are against that you're one of the special ones. That's
yeah,
the
and then
odds
when
are-
I have to beg you to go out and shoot for 45 minutes versus you, I have to beg you to come home at 10 o'clock at night when it's been
yeah,
out for an hour already. Like
yeah.
people don't understand how much you have to love basketball to be an
Mm.
NBA player.
Mm.
And the reference that I give is when I worked in Orlando, we had probably about 8 days off in the season per season, maybe even closer to 5, where it's just we've played a back to back. We're going to give a day off just to rest. There's nothing going on. And on my first year in the NBA, there was a day off, and I went in at like 10 o'clock that day just to grab my running shoes. I was going for a run. I had no experience in the NBA. We had a day off. And I go in, and there's like 5 players in the gym. And you find out that 2 have already been there, and there's 3 more coming that night on their one
their
of
day
5
off.
this year. And in Orlando, we had to get to the point where we said, okay, these are days off. This is a lockout day. We are locking the gym. Your little scan your thumb thing isn't going to work. So don't come here. Spend time with your family.
Wow.
And we had to say that to guys to, otherwise they would just come and play. And like the NBA season is a grind.
Mm.
The average person, you go through an NBA season and it'll be questionable whether you love basketball at the end of it. And not only do these guys still love it, but they love it enough that, what am I going to do today? I could do anything in the world today. I'm going to go back to the gym and practice.
Yeah. Yeah. That idea of burnout that you hear so many times in the younger ages is, I mean, it's not that these players don't feel it, but it's that drive and force that they choose to push past that because they know that one, probably everybody else is doing it. You know, nobody else is stopping from burnout. But then they know that improvement and growth will happen when they push through that feeling and don't stop as soon as their brain says to stop.
And they're probably just wired that way. It's
Yeah.
probably not even a conscious thought. It says, what are you going to do today? I'm going to go play hoops. And I think you need to, I think some of us can wire ourselves, like force ourselves to develop these habits. And then some of us are just like, every waking moment, I'm thinking about basketball and how to get better. And if you're that kind of a person and 6'7" and athletic, and the chances are you're going to end up in the NBA.
Yeah, but all of those factors that, yeah.
Like it's the best of the best of the
Yeah.
best.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so hard to get there. And then, yeah, they're just wired differently.
What's the best thing that you've borrowed lately? Which in coaching terms, that's stealing, but it's the same thing.
Oh man. Okay. Alex Sarama and Chris Oliver. Do you know those
Mhm.
names?
Mhm.
Okay. With Basketball Immersion.
Yep.
And if you're a listener and you don't know those guys, you need to become aware of those guys. They are on the forefront of incorporating making decisions into everything that we do when training and practicing, that not doing block practice, repetitive action with no decisions being made. They encourage a decision and some sort of variability in everything, which was really hard for me. I started really thinking about this about 5 or 6 years ago. And in the beginning, really hard for me to believe in and incorporate. And now it's become second nature, or much closer to second nature. So a lot of the things that they put out as far as just simple ways to incorporate some indecision / making a decision into even just form shooting. Like I do versions of form shooting now where it's a player has to react to my foot position and then make a decision. It's not just stand under the hoop and do this over and over and over again. It's okay. read a situation, read a cue that a defender is giving you, make an appropriate decision, and then remember the habits that we're teaching within the form. So it goes back to that. The situation is read my feet, hop this direction, form, shoot. But then what's the habit? Oh, when I'm doing that, I gotta get my guide hand off the ball. I gotta get my finger along the target line. All those kind of things, tying those to a decision. So I steal/borrow a lot of stuff from them.
Coaches, the one thing that every team needs is confident shooters. The last 8 years at Grapevine Faith, our teams have averaged 354 made threes each season. I love getting to share with coaches how our shooters train and, more importantly, how they think. If you would like to enhance your shooting culture at your school, contact me directly at jamodipodcast@gmail.com. All right, Coach, it's going to be about 30 seconds or so. I'm going to throw rapid fire questions at you. First thing that pops in your head, you just blurt it out.
And pizza be the answer to all the questions.
Pizza?
Yeah.
I love that. Speed round. Yeah. Ready? Favorite ice cream flavor?
Tiger. Do you know what Tiger is? That might be Canadian.
I don't.
It's orange and black licorice mix, and it sounds a little weird, but it's a little
okay. I thought you were messing with me, so I'm glad that you. Yeah.
They also call Tiger. Some people go Tiger. But
okay.
Sorry.
I'll have to try it. I've never had it. For high school, shot clock or no shot clock?
Shot clock. Even if it's 45 seconds, please give us a shot clock.
Exactly. Texting or talking?
Should be talking, and shouldn't even be a question. I text too much.
Favorite holiday?
Christmas.
Invisibility or super strength?
Super strength. I'm bald. Nobody looks at me.
If you could travel back in time, what period would you go to?
Jiminy crickets. That's a tough one. I don't have an answer to that.
Okay, you can pass.
I'm going to go 1960s.
Okay. Place you most want to travel?
Everywhere.
Everywhere.
Yeah. I guess Europe or anywhere involving a beach right now would be wonderful.
Yeah. Favorite junk food?
Geez, all of it. Potato chips.
Potato chips. How many cups of coffee do you drink per day?
I only started drinking coffee about 2 years ago at my wife's request. She said she wanted to have a husband that drank coffee and was disappointed that I didn't. And so I said, all right, I'll see if I can. So
one, do you like it, or you just kind of you stomach it?
I now like it, but I put a lot of sugar in it.
There you go.
I think I like the sugar.
Last question: Godfather or Star Wars?
I have to admit, I've never seen Godfather all the way through. I started watching it on an airplane, just going, I got it. Like everybody says this is so good, and I just couldn't get into it. And I grew up in the generation of Star Wars. So,
Coach, you and I are aligned with Star Wars. My dad, he was a Trekkie and a Star Wars guy, and so I grew up watching it. But
can I give you a lightning round, speed round?
You'd be the first one. You'd be the first one. Yeah.
You ready?
Yes, sir.
Favorite all-time player?
Pistol Pete.
A sporting event that you have to attend before you die.
A Grinnell basketball game. Grinnell College D3 school in Iowa, where they run the system, 5 players subbing in and out every 45 seconds. That's the team where Jack Taylor scored 138 points in a game. Coach, they're insane. I gotta see them. Yep.
Pizza or hamburgers?
Pizza.
Only allowed one album on the desert island.
NF, the Christian rapper. I love it. I love anything he does. Yeah. Wow, that's a good one though. Yeah.
And then last great book you read.
Last great book I read. Anxious for Nothing by Max Lucado.
All right.
Yeah.
Nice work.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, nobody's ever asked me to do it, so that was cool.
All right.
But Coach, this was awesome. And I love getting to learn from you and listening to how you teach. And Thank you so much for giving your time this morning.
I appreciate your time as well. This was a lot of fun. So and thanks for being a good sport on my lightning round.
Thank you for checking out today's episode. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast, share it with your fellow coaches, and find us on social media for what's coming up next on the Jamodi Podcast. It's just a matter of doing it.